Now, this session will be the concluding session of this chapter. The topics are going to be Indian system of medicine, indicators, and as pointed out earlier, the health status of a country can be assessed through indicators. At present, there are about 3,004 ISM hospitals. India has only about 17% of the world's population. Good morning and welcome to the session 6, the last session on Chapter 8, Infrastructure. Now, this session will be the concluding session of this chapter and also the most important session, as we are going to understand the various factors in terms of the healthcare. Now, moving forward, let us try to understand the topics for today. The topics are going to be Indian system of medicine, indicators, and healthcare infrastructure. We're going to do a critical appraisal for that. And we are also going to talk about the urban-rural, poor and rich divide. So if you look into the topics, it is more about the deeper understanding of the various economic factors and how they are being aligned. Now, let's try to understand the Indian systems of medicine. India is a land of treasure. We have been the founders of several medical systems that have been developed, and we know the secrets behind it. So India is a founder of Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, Naturopathy and Homeopathy. Put it together, we call it as Ayush. So this word is very important to you in terms of exam, also in terms of the concept. So what does Ayush stand for? Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, Naturopathy and Homeopathy. So all the 6 systems put together, we call it as the Indian system of medicine. At present, there are about 3,004 ISM hospitals, 23,028 dispensaries, as many as 6,11,431 registered practitioners in India. Quite a number for us to understand and develop. But definitely, India has been on a long stand in terms of inventing and understanding the rich science and tradition altogether in terms of healthcare. We were the founders of Ayurveda. The word Ayurveda itself relates to us the science of life. So that's where we have been the forerunners in terms of inventing and propagating better lifestyle conditions. But a little has been done to set up a framework as standalone education or to promote research. So it becomes very, very important for all of us here to study about the concepts and to develop it. Now, for example, if anybody wants to graduate or specialize in Ayurveda, we don't have too much of schools or colleges for that. We have a limited number of schools and colleges which practice or which go forward in terms of the Ayurveda or Naturopathy and Homeopathy institutes. So that's where we see that though there is a potential, there is a push, all we need to do is that we need to understand and we need to develop it forward. So ISM has a huge potential and they can solve a large part of our healthcare problem because they are effective and they are inexpensive. Most important thing here, they are highly effective. They don't have any side effects. They are not commercial kind of thing, and they can give us a better understanding altogether. And most importantly, for it is affordable to all the hundreds and thousands of people living in this great country. We are also going to understand about the indicators of healthcare infrastructure, a critical appraisal altogether. As pointed out earlier, the health status of a country can be assessed through indicators like infant mortality and maternal mortality, nutrition, and other factors. Scholars argue that there is a greater scope of role of government in this healthcare sector, which is undoubtedly true. Why? Because with just indicators and numbers that are being thrown, there is always a factor that we need to understand, that government can bring in better institution, can bring in affordable healthcare policies and program, can build in better insurance sectors so that we will be able to grow further. For instance, there are a lot of things that will show the expenditure of healthcare that only 5% has been spent on the GDP. This is very, very low when compared to the big nations or the developed nations in the world. You will also seem to understand that India has only about 17% of the world's population, but it bears a frightening 20% of global burden of disease. This point is highly valuable. Though India has got 17% of the world's population, but the global burden of disease, which means people prone to that disease taking or the communicating factors, are 20%, which is even more higher. So that is alarming situation for India unless and until we take care of it at the earlier stages. It is an indicator. The GBT is an indicator by the experts that gauge the number of people dying prematurely due to a particular disease, as well as the number of years spent by them in the state of disability. Now, this is very, very important. Now, when you look at a particular kind of disease, it might be a cancer, or it might be a thyroid problem, it might be tuberculosis, or it might be brain diseases, tumor, or any kind of diseases. These are all a global burden to the nation as well as to the world, because more the person spends time in recovering from that disease, automatically the productivity of those person comes down, and this will in turn pull the GDP downward. So the primary ideology here is to make people be more healthy and effective so that they can contribute to the nation. In India, more than half of the GBD is accounted for communicable diseases such as diarrhea, malaria, and tuberculosis. So there are many diseases in India which still people are finding it difficult to overcome, and they become a victim to these diseases. So it is the mandatory function or a mandatory order that we need to see where we can overcome these diseases, where we can overcome these shortcomings and make our people lead a healthy and effective life altogether. Now, moving forward, the indicators of the healthcare critical infrastructure, when we start looking at an appraisal factor here, every year, around 5 lakh children die out of waterborne diseases. It's a very, very sorry state of affair to talk about. And we also see that the danger of disease like AIDS or cancer or blood tumor coming up in India. Now, 5 lakh children dying just because of waterborne diseases is quite alarming. The reason is that, again, we have to go back, think about our hygiene and sanitation conditions. Is that enough that we have taken a proper step to measure and to protect our children? Unfortunately, no, because there are many villages, there are many places in India where still proper drinking water and sanitation facility is not available, because of which so many children are dying every year. So it becomes the responsibility of the government as well as private organizations who can take care of this situation and bring our children out of any kind of diseases. The malnutrition and inadequate supply of vaccines lead to the death of 2.2 million children every day. Now, this is also quite alarming. Children and people dying without food, which is a very big sin and which is a very big crime altogether. Why? Because the government is not able to help them overcome the basic hunger. So we also need to take care of this factor so that we are able to save people and we are able to make them productive and we are able to give a better status to our nation. At present, less than 20% of the population utilizes the public healthcare facility, which means to say that People living in urban cities or tier 2 cities still do not go to government hospitals because they don't believe in that. So they don't make a use of the government hospitals or the infrastructure facilities that have been provided. They still feel that they are not up to the mark. They don't keep up to their promises. Their quality or their standards are not good. So only 20% of the people are utilizing the government facilities altogether. Another study has also pointed out that 38% of public healthcare facilities have a required number of doctors and only 30% have sufficient stock of medicine. This is also quite alarming. Why? Because if you start seeing and understanding the situation here, healthcare facilities cannot take things lightly. They cannot take things at a last moment or an emergency basis. They need to be well stocked. They need to have all the facilities in place. But when we look at the statistics here, it is quite alarming for all of us because only 30% of the hospitals and doctors are sufficiently having all kind of facilities and benefits that are needed for the treatment of the people. But for the remaining people, for the remaining hospitals, we don't have much to take care about. So that is quite disturbing all about. Now, moving forward, we also need to understand 70% of India's population lives in the rural areas. That is probably when I talk about this topic called as the urban-rural, poor and rich divide, you will be able to see that 1/5 of the hospitals are only located in rural area. That's because poor people live in rural area. That's the perception, that's the understanding, that's the image that we have sent. Rural India has only half the number of dispensaries in about 7 lakh beds. That is very, very less. In roughly, I would say only 11% is available in rural areas. 89% is available in big cities. Thus, people living in rural areas do not have sufficient medical infrastructure, which is very, very saddening part because even those people, in case of emergency, will migrate from the rural sector and come towards the city. This has led to a lot of differences in terms of the health status of the people. People feel that they have not been given enough opportunity. People feel that they have been denied from getting those kind of opportunity altogether. Now, moving forward, as far as hospitals are concerned, there are only 0.36. I would like to put this number as less than 1% for every 1 lakh people in the areas of the rural sector when compared to 3.6 for the same number of people in the urban areas, which means to say that, again, look at the divide. If you are a part of the rural India, you are not getting enough opportunities, you are not getting enough factors that are helping you to take care of your health. On the other side, the urban India is able to get more hospitals, they are able to get more medical treatment and facilities. The public healthcare centers which are located across the rural India does not even offer X-ray or blood test or any kind of basic facilities that you can think about in terms of the urban cities. Many states like Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh are relatively lagging behind in terms of healthcare facilities. So one side, when you are talking about the nation in terms of development and infrastructure, the other side, there are some states which do not even have this basic facility. That needs to be improved, that needs to be given a higher importance and priority altogether. We also need to understand in rural areas, the percentage of people who have no access to proper care has risen to almost 24 in 2003. So villages have no access to any specialized medical care at all, like pediatrics, gynecology department, anesthesia, or obstetrics. What I would like to say here is that the specialty medical care center itself is not there in the rural area. That is one of the reasons why the rural people have to go to the urban center to take care of themselves. Even though 165 recognized medical colleges produce about 12,000 medical graduates, there is still a shortage of doctor, which means to say that the profession called as medical still needs to pick up, still needs to inspire those millions of students, because many of them feel that this profession is tough, it is quite challenging and it's difficult to pass through. But then the need for doctors is always there in our country. So somewhere down the lane, we have to reduce this this shortage, and we have to make the system even more effective as far as possible. Now, while 1/5 of this doctor graduates leave the country because for monetary perspectives, most of the other graduates try to settle down in urban areas. Very few people want to go to the rural area and help people. So that is where you see that 20%, the poorest of 20% of Indians living in both urban and rural area spend about 12% of their income on healthcare, while the rich spend only 2%. That's where you can see the divide that is happening altogether. All of us are human beings, but one gets a priority over other. So what happens when the poor fall sick? Many of them have to sell their lands, many of them have to sell their houses, pledge their jewel to afford saving, but then that does not happen. And ultimately they just come to the disease and they die. So this is one of the biggest things that needs to be taken care, where you are able to make an affordable activity in terms of growth. Since the government-run hospitals do not provide sufficient facilities, the poor are driven to private hospitals, which makes them in debt forever. So, or else they have to opt to die. Now look at the condition. Since they are not able to save people, since they are not able to make them come back to normalcy, automatically what happens? They're not able to grow and they are not able to do anything proper. So they have to go back to a situation where they are not able to feed themselves. This leads to a very, very bad situation, a very critical situation as far as possible. Now, moving forward, with this, we come to the conclusion of this session, where I would like to thank each one of you in terms of making you understand what is the healthcare session. We would also discuss about this in terms of the factors that governs in the growth or in the healthcare infrastructure altogether. But the concept of healthcare infrastructure is very, very important for all of us to understand, because this will contribute in a large way for the economic development of the country. Only and until when we have a healthy India, we will be able to go forward and live peacefully. With this, I would like to conclude my session, and I thank each one of you for joining me today. Have a great day ahead.